So after finishing Atlas Shrugged, I made a mention of what my next book was going to be, and I have been requested to do a review of it. So, this is it. From Russia, with Love, the James Bond thriller. First, just a little bit of a background, just to kind of tell you where I'm coming from in terms of where I've read books. To say that I've read them out of order is a bit of an understatement. So I first started with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. You'll notice that my copy is very beat up, so I basically tried to reinforce the cover as well as I could. In fact, the back cover isn't really all that a shape either. However, I am happy that the pages were intact. I was really amazed how really close the movie stuck with the book, with just enough differences to make it interesting. For example, the character of Bond. The way he was described, it kind of made me think more Lazenby if he had like some sort of white scar on his cheek right there. But maybe that's just me. So after reading this book, I was interested to see more of the Bond book series. The next one I went to was Moonraker. And wow, I definitely had a lot of fun with this one. You'll notice that it's a lot different than the last one I have. Not only are the pages yellow instead of red, but they're also published by different publishers, Signet and Bantam. I'm a pretty big fan of the Signet books myself. I just love the artwork on these. Well, this is not a really good example, as the majority of the cover is just the title. But I will say, I do really like the cover of the Bantam book, although this little picture here kind of makes it a little uncomfortable to read in public. So I found both of those at a Salvation Army. Later I went to a flea market and picked up both of these, Dr. No and then For Your Eyes Only. Since For Your Eyes Only was a collection of short stories, I went with Dr. No first. And wow. This one is quite off the wall compared to the movie. Kind of a pity though. I feel like if Eon Productions had a bit more money, I would have loved to have seen that fight with the giant squid. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, that'll give you something to look forward to. And then For Your Eyes Only. In terms of what was made into movies, one of the short stories is called A View to a Kill, but it has nothing to do with Roger Moore's last movie. As for the title itself, For Your Eyes Only, I feel like it's more based off of the second to last short story, which is called Risico, I believe. And that's just kind of the short scene where they're breaking into a smuggler's hideout. After that, well, I found a rather strange coincidence that I found The Spy Who Loved Me. It was pretty hilarious because when I found this, it was probably about maybe a month or two into the development of the mod project. So I just consider this as fate. Now, aside from the book itself, there is one scene from the book that did kind of inspire the game. But that's about it, really. This book and the movie are only similar by the title and that James Bond is in it. I mean, maybe if you want to dig deep, there is a rather tall guy that has some odd-looking teeth and a short, pudgy buff guy, which maybe that's Jaws and Sander, but I feel like that's mostly speculation. After that, I kind of lost faith that I'd find the rest at other thrift stores, so I decided to start buying them online. The next one I went into was Diamonds Are Forever. Now, I kind of figured that the book universe and the movie universe were going to be the same, so I kind of thought Diamonds Are Forever was going to be the gritty revenge story that I wanted the movie to be. But no such luck. Not necessarily bad. I wouldn't say it's anything too crazy. I mean, it's a James Bond book, so obviously you're going to have some fun action sequences, you're going to have some girl flaunting over him, and a rather interesting villain. Unfortunately, no Blofeld like in the movie. Now, it was shortly after finishing Diamonds Are Forever, one of my co-workers was wondering what to get me for Christmas. So, I kind of went through the list of all the books that I was missing. I figured maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to start with the beginning, since I actually knew what the orders of the books were. And they got me Casino Royale. Now, you'll notice that this is a very newer book compared to all the other ones I have. However, it is interesting that on the back it does list the price in pounds, so the idea this actually came from England is rather interesting. But all the same, maybe it's just me, I'm an odd book nerd, but I like the old stuff. I mean, first of all, like, the pages are dark red, like the blood that Bond is spilled in most of these novels. The feel of both of these books is a lot different, and, well, I just frankly like the smell of the old pages. After finishing Casino Royale, I took a bit of a break for a while. And then, that's more or less when the quarantine started. So as a way to try to pass the time, I figured I was just going to read books like crazy. So I decided to go for the sequel, Live and Let Die. This one I also bought online. You'll notice that I'm a really big fan of these Signet books. Not only are they really cheap, but I just love the look and the feel of them. So that's my basic background. In terms of where it fits into the canon of the books, Diamonds Are Forever is what leads up to From Russia with Love. It's one thing I found rather interesting about the books compared to the movies is that there actually is quite a bit of continuity. The first thing is that there's a lot of mentions to Tiffany Chase. She was the girl that was in Diamonds Are Forever. It seemed like they were going pretty steady for a while, but in this book, they just kind of slowly drifted apart and she fell for a man somewhere in the United States. It's really weird how this book begins. Like, about maybe the first third of it is mostly describing the great plan as to how to humiliate and then later kill James Bond. Now, for those of you that haven't read the books, you'll notice that Spectre isn't really a thing here. Instead, it's Smersh. If you read Live and Let Die, they'll actually explain what that is short for. But pretty much the main thing you need to know is that it is a Russian organization that is just bent on trying to destroy the British Secret Service, both in terms of personnel and in morale. So I'll give like a basic rundown of what the story is. Now at the very beginning we hone on this character named Red Grant, who is basically described as a werewolf. Apparently during the full moon, he gets some sort of crazed feeling and that he has to kill somebody in order to quell this desire. And this is on top of him being like a giant mountain, being the son of like a professional wrestler, as well as just enjoying fighting in general. He later went on to join the military, but found that there wasn't enough killing for him, so he decided to defect to the Russians. There was a bit of hesitation, but after enough time, they found him to be quite an invaluable asset, especially for the assignment that they cooked up. What they're trying to do is that James Bond has destroyed most of their plans they had. They killed off Le Chiffre in Casino Royale. They killed off Mr. Big in Live and Let Die. And there's even a small mention of Moonraker in there. Which, like I said before, it's just kind of amazing that there's continuity in the books. It's not something I'm used to when watching the movies. I will say, reading the first chapter of this, I was really amazed how, like, sunk in I was. I mean, there was parts of Atlas Shrugged where I'd get really into it and I could basically see, like, the snow-covered mountains, the thick pine wood, the hot metal being poured on the rail and stuff like that. But here, I was just in the scene. I saw exactly everything that was going on. And they actually kind of explain a big question I always had about the movie. So, whenever they go to Spectre Island, where they show Red Grant is on the ground getting ready for a massage, you see the masseuse just strip naked for some reason. Now, in the movie, I always thought that was a bit of eye candy for the men watching it. However, after reading the book, I found out there's actually a very good reason for this. Essentially, it would get really hot out there, so she would build up a sweat. And then on top of this, Red Grant's muscles were very thick and very tense, so actually working out all the kinks built up an even bigger sweat, so it was just easier for her to strip down and to have to get a new pair of clothes each time. So that was very interesting. So after we get the idea of what the basic plan is, we then go to Bond in England. He's been just kind of sitting around for the past year and a half or so. There hasn't really been a whole lot of action going on in MI6 lately. So he's just been at home reading the paper, and he's been kind of cursing himself because he's kind of getting soft. He's losing his touch to be able to do his job properly. So he kind of jumps at the idea when his superior officer, M, calls in to tell him about a very mysterious assignment. Essentially, there's this Russian girl named Tatiana Romanova who has fallen madly in love with his picture and wants to defect. It kind of seems like a trap, but the main thing is she says she's going to bring in a cryptography device, one that, even if they just barely get a few keys out of, would be invaluable for the service. So they seem like it's worth the risk. Bond goes to Turkey, where we meet Draco Karam. Now, this is one of the major changes I'm still trying to figure out. So sometimes this character is referred to as Karam Bey, like he is in the movie, but for the most part everybody calls him Darko. Mostly because father gave him that name because apparently he had a rather darker skin tone compared to all his other brothers. And yeah, as I'm reading the book, I'm just only hearing and seeing Pedro Armendáriz doing the "my friend." You know, that is not necessarily the best way to do it. In fact, there's even a part in it which they took right from the movie. "This is an old friend of mine, and it tells me something smells." However, there is a pretty major plot change here. So in the movie, there is a bomb planted in Karam Bey's office in retaliation for one of their agents being found killed, which is what Donald Grant did. However, here in the book, they basically tried to do away with Karam right at the beginning before Bond could even get to Turkey. However, they were unsuccessful for the same reason as in the movie. He was making passionate love to one of his concubines. So for the most part, it's just kind of a back and forth for Bond, just kind of waiting for Tatiana to be able to make contact with him. There's a lot of back and forth. One such story, they go to a gypsy camp like in the movie, but they are invaded by a Russian assassin trying to finish the botched job from earlier. However, once again, they were unsuccessful. One of the other bigger points here is, in the movie, Karam's arm gets shot and he is unable to defend himself. Here, the gun jams, and that's why he was unable to do it. Now, after the second attempt on his life, Darko has had enough, and he's going to go after the assassin that tried to get him at the gypsy camp. Now, like I said, in the movie, his arm got shot, so he's barely able to do this, but here in the book, it's funny that he's the one that's carrying the weapon. He's the one that's ready to murder this guy. Well, in the movie, it's Bond that does it. I also like to think that the way they describe Karam's weapon in the book, it sounds very similar to Tchaikovsky's cane gun from The World Is Not Enough. So the assassin is dispatched, and as soon as Bond makes it back to the hotel, he is contacted by Tatiana. She lays out the basic plan of how she wants to escape. She is adamant that it's got to be on board the Orient Express, which, if you're a big Agatha Christie fan, you would know that anybody that goes on the Orient Express seems to end up murdered. Plus, on top of that, it's a journey that would take about a week as opposed to maybe a day and a half flying. This is kind of a way to discredit Bond a little more along the way, as well as just kind of make the love story a little more convincing. However, Tatiana falls for her own con and ends up actually falling in love with Bond. Bond is still a little suspicious of this girl, so Karam rides along just to make sure that everything is alright. For the most part, everything seems to go smoothly. There's a little bit of a rough patch where there's 3 agents have to be gotten rid of on the train. Karam is able to take care of 2 of them, however, the 3rd doesn't seem to want to leave the cabin, so they just kind of leave him be. Unfortunately, later on, both Karam and this 3rd man are found dead, and a lot more gruesome than how it is shown in the movie for obvious reasons. Bond is a little concerned and reports to headquarters. However, he does not ask for backup. However, he does run into Red Grant from earlier. Since he is an Englishman, he assumes that he is also part of the MI6 family. So he allows him in, and just like in the movie, while he is going over his escape plan, he is able to dispatch Bond. It's rather fascinating how it worked in this one. So apparently Red Grant has a rigged copy of War and Peace, where the best way I can describe it is, if you hold it like this, the gun is pointed outward, and then there's a little bit of a switch in the back which would fire. So he kind of explains how good of a shot he is by shooting off his wristwatch glass, and there he sees all the particles going to pieces. Now, in order for this kill to look more like a suicide rather than straight up murder, he tries to do it in the middle of a dark tunnel, as well as having the thud of the tunnel drown out the noise of the gun. So right before the lights go out, Bond is actually able to hold up a cigarette case in order to stop the bullet. However, it does kind of pierce him a little bit, and there's a little bit of blood there. So he plays dead. Unlike the movie where there is a fantastic fight between Bond and Red Grant, Bond kind of takes the cheap way out, so to speak. I can't necessarily blame him because the way they describe Grant in this book, he just seems like a mountain that really can't be taken out. So, just like in the movie, there is a rigged attaché case which has knives on the side. As Grant is going over to try to take care of Tatiana, Bond reaches for the suitcase and picks up one of the knives and stabs him right in one of the major arteries in his leg. It's a very bloody and gruesome scene, and after losing enough blood, he is gone. Now, just like in the movie, in this book, Grant basically outlines the entire plan to James Bond, which seems a little stupid from a character standpoint, but it is essential from a storytelling standpoint. Now, the basic idea is that in order to discredit him, they wanted to make it look like he committed suicide because Tatiana had blackmail on him in the form of a pornographic movie. Oh yeah, that's one other thing I forgot to mention. When Bond and Tanya first met, they get it on. But unbeknownst to both of them, they're being recorded, and that's the blackmail being found in Tatiana's bag. It would be convinced that she was killed by Bond because she didn't want that footage to get out to the press. And then that would both discredit the service and him. There is one major difference, though. After he is done, he goes into detail about meeting up with his superior to check in, even telling him where and when it is. So he goes there and tries to confront this mysterious head, one Rosa Klebb. At first, Bond is a little confused because, well, even back then, it's still a little weird to think that the head of an assassination organization is a woman. And plus, she really kind of played the part of being just an old spinster. However, after enough time, Bond is able to see through the disguise and she attempts to attack. Now, what I find rather interesting is how they end this. So, Bond ends up poisoned, while one of his workmates, who is also in the room, sees him collapse to the ground and continues a conversation as if nothing happened. It's just kind of like, oh, let's get some beautiful ladies for tonight. And even as he's on the ground, barely breathing, he's just like, that'd be nice. And then he just drops dead. Now, one of the major theories I've heard is that Ian Fleming was trying to pull a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, the basic story about that is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is the writer of Sherlock Holmes. He basically just had enough with the character, so he killed him. And a very similar thing tried to happen here. However, I guess he changed his mind, or maybe the book started to get popular again. so he started to write a lot more after this. The next book he wrote was Dr. No, which it's kind of interesting how they gloss over the idea that he's poisoned. It's just kind of like he's in hospital for like 3 months and it's like, any after effects? No? Okay. How about we send him on this easier assignment, a Junius Dr. No, that should help his spirits out a little bit. But now I'm actually getting into the review of Dr. No now. So I will definitely say, thus far, it seems like this is probably the book that matches up the most closely with the movie. I will definitely say I think the movie is a little bit better, though. This one is a bit of a slow burn. In fact, even the movie is kind of a slow burn, but I don't know. I feel like they're able to sneak in a little bit more action here and there, as well as almost add a little bit more of a mythos that was kind of missing from the book. So, would I recommend it? Well, if you're reading the other books in the series, go for it. It kind of fills in a few of the blanks. Like, for example, I skipped from Diamonds Are Forever to Dr. No, and I'm just like, why was Bond in the hospital? In fact, it was even more confusing for me because I started with Diamonds Are Forever instead of Live and Let Die, so I'm wondering what happened to Felix. If I got one piece of advice is if you're going to read the James Bond novels, read them in order, because it's just going to get kind of confusing if you don't. So that is my review of From Russia with Love. The next book I'm working on now is Goldfinger, which took place after Dr. No did. I can definitely say right now, I'm only about 2 chapters into this, but I'm really liking it. It kind of reminds me a lot of Moonraker. There's just something very about it. So this one is probably going to be a lot faster of a read for me than From Russia with Love. It's not that From Russia with Love was a bad book, it's just I found myself not really engaged in it as much, so I read it a lot slower. That's all I can think of. Well, if you want my review of Goldfinger, maybe in a month or 2 I'll be done with it, and I hope to see you then. Until next time, keep having fun.